Shalom Hebrews, Shalom Hebrews. Back at it again. Back at it again. Alright, Israelites, I be listening to Israelites. I just finished listening to some Israelites do it, and they doing a lot of shouting. You know what I'm saying? They got, you know what I'm saying, they had the tables with a whole bunch of people, men agreeing with the lies, and they don't really know history. They don't know nothing about Ashkenazi. They don't know nothing about the Sephardis, but it's two rabbis. It's two rabbis in the promised land, two head rabbis over each one of those groups. But the Israelites don't know this, man. All they know is they are the synagogue of Satan. You know what I'm saying? They read, man, I think that's Revelations 2:9. You know what I'm saying? I know the works in tribulations and poverty, that thou art rich, and I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, and are the synagogue of Satan. Man, they think they own to that. Man, they'll look at Ashkenazi and say, in the Sephardim, is really all Jewish peoples, and they'll say, that's the synagogue of Satan. Man, they don't have no understanding and no real truth, you know, and they be mixing the history up. They don't know that Ashkenazi been in our heritage, under the name Scythian. You know, the Scythians, look, research rabbinical history. They'll show you that the Scythians are Ashkenazi. And Ashkenazi settled in the Discopolis cities after the Babylonian Wars. You know what I'm saying? They try to say, we're doing Greek times. You know, that's when they start putting these synagogues together. You know what I'm saying? Around about Greek times, after the exiles from Babylon was destroyed. You know, the exiles from Babylon, that's going to be the books of Nehemiah, Ezra, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Man, I can kind of like put it in order. You know what I'm saying? It's in order right here. And it's Ezra 537 to 426 BCE. Haggai 520 BCE. Zechariah 520 BCE. Esther 483 to 472 BCE. Nehemiah 445 to 432 BC. And the last book, the book of Malachi. Alright, if you read them books, it's no way in the world that the exiles could have continued on another 500 something years, which, you know, is the New Testament. And that Israelites don't know that Ashkenazi settled in our land with the Babylonians. They made up the Babylonian army. If you look up who destroyed the Assyrians in 612 BCE, you will see that Ashkenazi under the name Scythian was one of the groups. And those same folks from Babylon would come to our land and right after King Josiah was killed by the Egyptians, man, around about 595, man, to be the book of Ezekiel. That's their first wave. You know, they came in around about 601, you know, because we was doing Egyptian religion. We wouldn't stop. And then, man, around about 595 BCE, that was like the first captivity. They took Israelites, man, to Babylon. Then the second wave, because we wouldn't straighten up, and we didn't learn, be the book of Jeremiah, our last act for the 99%. And that, you know, we went into Africa to do the Egyptian religion. Well, Ashkenazi was there under the Chaldean name, you see, but he made up the Chaldean army. You know, that's why you know, the Ashkenazi only had certain kind of arrows. I ain't got the pictures of the arrows right now, but I got videos showing certain kind of arrows only they developed. And guess what? They still finding them in the promised land right now today. They finding those arrowheads that Ashkenazi used on us in the book of Jeremiah to drive us out, because we wouldn't stop doing Egyptian religion. Well, they settled in what's called Scythopolis, ancient Beth-Shean. Ancient Beth-Shean, they settled there. And they stayed quiet for a little while, you know what I'm saying? But then they start erecting synagogues, because remember, Prophet Obadiah and the other prophets say that Edom would come in, meaning get our land after we left and after we had troubles and was driven off. All right, the Edomites constructed a temple. They took the temple that Zerubbabel repaired on all the way down. Hur did. You can look it up, man, around about 50 BC to 20 BCE. Hur start, men constructing him a temple on the grounds that we once had one on, and that he took it all the way down, and that he rebuilt, he built him a new temple, and it was in building all the way to the Ashkenazi kindreds. The Romans came in and destroyed it, and the reason they destroyed it was to give Ashkenazi a start with the synagogues. That's why it's no temple and it's synagogues everywhere. I even went to one in the Promised Land. They had over 500 synagogues in the Promised Land. Well, when you Israelites be reading it, the synagogue of Satan, they are the synagogue of Satan, and then stick your head up and stick your chest out like you done said something real good. You lost, because Ashkenazi created the synagogues, and the Edomites had the temple, but it was broke or burnt down. So Jesus, being of the Edomite stock, because ain't no way in the world y'all son gonna go to her temple and call it his father's house. Hur built that temple. Hur was in control, and Hur was an Edomite then. And he wasn't supposed to be in our land. There's prophecies about Edomites' destruction for acquiring our land. Well, you Israelites don't know that, and you cannot tell the difference between one group or the other, and you just bunch it all together. I just made a video explaining this a little bit, but I'm going a little more in detail using that famous verse that the Israelite used, from the synagogue of Satan. They are the synagogue of Satan. Y'all lost, man. That's Ashkenazi. That's Ashkenazi with the synagogues. And that the temple that Hur built was destroyed. Hur was an Edomite. Ain't no way in the world y'all gonna have a son and then he gonna go in the Edomite temple and call it his father's house. If you read the New Testament, you will see that, throughout it, that fella that they called Jesus, and we know it wasn't no J around then, and that, they called him Yawashi or Yahshua or something like that. But anyway, that he didn't know no real history, because he was descended from the Edomites who was converted to Judaism by John Harnack's Maccabees. I traced the Maccabees' history. They wasn't nothing but Moabites, Ammonites, Amorites, and Edomites. That's where the term Semitic come from. Mix. Half and half, just like you Israelites mix their history up, and come out with half truth, half lies, half confusion. Well, you Israelites need to learn some real history. That the reason that they was called the synagogue of Satan is because Ashkenazi and the Sephardim, the Edomites, been having a struggle over the Israelite heritage. They've been having a struggle over the Israelite heritage, and I got a video showing that the fella, so-called Jesus, spent this time trying to convert them and educate them. You see what I'm saying? And how that they would raise, they would raise a mess. Sometimes they tried to stone him. Sometimes they tried to throw him off cliffs and all kind of stuff. He was struggling with Ashkenazi, because Ashkenazi had the synagogues. Ashkenazi had the synagogues. That was their schools, and for them to learn Israelite history. And then when they had heard Edomite temple destroyed, then they got books. They got books and start developing what they call their aspect of the Israelite heritage. It fall under Judaism, both of them. And that's how, Ashkenazi got on. But you Israelites, to read the New Testament and think that it's Israelite heritage when it's actually the people who occupied our land, Ashkenazi and the Sephardim, who wasn't driven into Africa in the book of Jeremiah around about 588 BC. And they most definitely wasn't the exiles. The little couple of thousand that made it back from Babylon was destroyed real fast. That's why 500 years of blank history went by. Now the Maccabees wrote some books. Them Edomite Amorites wrote some books because they thought that they was the real Israelites. You know, they thought they was the real Israelites. Man, they been in our heritage since Exodus. And then when we left, they didn't record none of us going into Africa during the Babylonian Wars in world history. And it's only in the Tanakh. That's cold-blooded, that the Israelites that went into Africa to do the Egyptian religion history is only in the Tanakh, besides what I show, besides what the Israelite Brotherhood show. Other than that, you got blank history. One time, man, they took down one of my videos because the Edomite Abram Henderson was doing history, man, about the Jewish community, and then he went off into Africa and how he started naming the Limbas and the Igabus and all the other African tribes that come off the Edomites when they came into Africa, and when the ones that in the Falashas, you know, the Ethiopian Jews, he made a video about them, and I explained their origin, how they come from Yemen, Teman, and then went off into Africa. And then they'll tell you this, and some of them, like the Igabus, gonna be the ones that got kicked out of Spain and then went to them Edomites when heard Edomite temple was destroyed in 70 AD, and then they ran across North Africa and settled in Spain and Portugal. You know, that's the origin of Aaron Lopez. You know, Aaron Lopez, that, you know, with the transatlantic slave trade. Well, his folks went off into Africa and made it with the Hamites. Meaning the Amorites are descendants from the Hamites. You know, that they Canaan kids and so forth. So they descendants and kin to the Hamites. So they made it with them, and they gave them Judaism. A lot of Israelites don't know real history, and that you only know the myths that was created, like the 10 lost tribes. Man, that's a lie. It never was any 10 lost tribes. You know, they tried to say that it was lost tribes to account for the people that they converted in all the different lands, from China to India, in the Malaysian islands, and in Africa, and everywhere they converted. They let them people fall up under the 10 lost tribes doctrines. See, you Israelites don't know real history, and that you mix the Sephardim and Ashkenazi history together. Ashkenazi been in our land since the Babylonian Wars. And the Sephardim, the Sephardim, they been in our heritage as Amorites because they come from Cyprus and Babylon. And then they been in our heritage since Exodus, since Joshua, the book of Joshua. And then that's when they come in, but they didn't get the Israelite title till after the exiles were destroyed. But they've been hanging around our heritage and knew everything we did, and knew the whole history in detail, because they've been with us since we exited Egypt. You know, you Israelites, man, got to wake up, man, and stop mixing these folks' history. You know, it's like when you say the Synagogue of Satan. They are the Synagogue of Satan. Man, I know instantly that you don't know what you're talking about when that come out your mouth. I know you don't know Israelite history, for the simple fact that if you knew Israelite history, you would know that Ashkenazi settled in the Discopolis cities. And Scythopolis was the head city. Scythopolis was the head city in that they developed the synagogues for their teaching and their consumption of the Israelite heritage. You know, I've been in synagogues. Man, that's their institutions for learning the Israelite heritage, and how that they absorb the Israelite heritage in their created places of worship. So, you know, when you Israelites say, oh, the Synagogue of Satan, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know no real Israelite history, because you're mixing it. And you don't know that you're mixing it because you don't know nothing about Sephardim and Ashkenazi and how they have separate history. That's like all the books, man, I'm talking about a lot of books wrote in the BC days after the exiles were destroyed, after Malachi. Books start popping up during Greek times, the apocryphal books. That's the Edomites, that's the Amorites who were scribes creating them books. Man, they had been in the Israelite heritage since Joshua. They had been in our heritage since Joshua days, and they were scribes already. And then they start writing books. Well, you Israelites will get them books, and then you'll read them, and you'll put your whole heart in it, and then you think that you got real Israelite history. You know, that's what's been keeping them folks strong, because you're not able to separate real Israelite history from the history that they done created, because you don't know that it's two groups controlling men Israelite heritage. You don't know that it's two groups. You don't know nothing about Ashkenazi being called Scythians. You don't know about the Sephardim come from Sephardim, and that they've been in our heritage, and that they were scribes. If you go to 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 21, you'll see Sephardim at one time on a computer. Before I start showing this, it used to trans straight out to Sephardim, but now they done stopped that. You see what I'm saying? They wake up to everything that I show. They be watching. They be watching, and then they go back and see what they can clean up. You know, they go back and see what they can clean up. And then, you know, they'll sit back and watch and see what else I come out with. But it's okay, because Almighty Yah still going to bring us home no matter what they do, or no matter what I say. The end result is that we're going to be in our heritage one day worshiping Yah, and they not going to be in control. That's like now. A lot of Israelites don't know that the Eastern nations, BRICS, is slick controlled by the Edomites, the Sephardim, and they trying to get rid of Ashkenazi so they can unite the Africans and the Arab tribes, and then have their own economy to combat Ashkenazi, who is got control of the Western economy, the Western money, the euro, the dollar, and so forth. That's under Ashkenazi control from their banks. And that if the Sephardim destroy their money and then get them in war with the Eastern nations and defeat them, that the Sephardim been in the Islamic lands, man, forever, because they created Islam. Sephardim created Islam. They ain't gonna say this. That's how Islam got a portion of the Israelite heritage, and the people of the books are the Sephardim. The Sephardim, they the people of the books. They the people of the books, because they've been writing books since Babylon. They've been responsible for Babylon, God's history, and so forth, keeping it alive. See, you Israelites got to learn some real history, man. I'm talking about you got to learn some real history, and that you can't use them folks' history thinking that you using real Israelite history, even though it feel good and it make you seem like you wise, because you quoting verses out of what they call the Bible, the New Testament. So it got you feeling good, like you done did something and you done said something, but you really haven't, because you don't know truth. And you don't know that Ashkenazi created the synagogues, and that Herd and the Edomites had the temple, but the Romans, Ashkenazi kindred, destroyed Herd Edomite temple, and then they gave the synagogues their booths, and that fellow Jesus was upset and mad about that, because they wasn't going to the temple. They wasn't going to the temple to worship, and that they was worshiping in their own spot, because Ashkenazi came in separate from the Sephardim, and that they've been trying to wrestle control of the Israelite title from each other for a long time. That's basically the origin of all these wars today, even though they done distanced themselves from their original origin. But basically, when you break it down, it's them two groups fighting for control. You see what I'm saying? And now it then accumulated into what's going on in the promised land now today. The war that they in, you know, Ashkenazi and the Sephardim are trying to uproot the Ashkenazi, trying to get him out the way, because he know we got to come back home. So if he get rid of Ashkenazi, then he'll be there when we get there, and then he might get to dictate with you Israelites that don't know truth heritage, and guide y'all on in to their heritage, and then they get to stay in charge and have some prevalence. See, you Israelites don't know that, and that y'all don't really know what's going on, and how y'all just mix the history up, and then it got you confused, because you don't know that it's two groups been fighting over our heritage since we abandoned it for Egyptian religion. You know, we went into Africa in the book of Jeremiah, the Queen of Heaven. When you get to the 40s, man, they get down to the nitty gritty of how we told Prophet Jeremiah, hey man, go ask Almighty Yah what we should do after Ashkenazi put the sword to us. You know, these arrows are still being found in the promised land, what Ashkenazi did. All right, and then he come back after going to talk to the Creator, and the Creator told us to go back to the promised land. We said, no, he ain't tell us to go back to the promised land. You trying to trick us. And then we can go into Africa and do the Egyptian religion. Well, we went into Africa to do the Egyptian religion, and we was eventually enslaved. We was enslaved for that, and we was taken to this strange land, and we've been in bondage ever since. And now we're trying to get it together, but we can't get it together if we're using false history to explain real Israelite history. Man, some of you guys, man, are so in left field that it's a shame, but you know, it is what it is. But fortunately, we do have real Israelite history, and that's what the Israelite Brotherhood showed. I made it a purpose, man, that when I found out the difference between Ashkenazi and Sephardim, I said, I'm not using their history to explain real Israelite history, our heritage, and how I can separate it and you know, do their history separate from ours. Most Israelites can't do that, and how you just mix it all together. You know, you don't know that Sephardi and Ashkenazi been in our heritage since the Babylonian Wars, fighting and trying to control it. That's why it's two rabbis, David Liu for Ashkenazi and Yosef Yissim, whatever he named it. He hateful too. He hate us, but he know we got to come home. He know we got to come home, and they slick trying to clear the way, get Ashkenazi out the way. That's why I've been trying to, you know, want to work with Ashkenazi, because it's prophecy to show that, you know, Japhet shall dwell in the tents of Shem. You know, he can stay in our house. You know, he can stay in the north, and then we have the south, and then we get rid of the other ones. You know, that's the Israelite Brotherhood plan. Whether they follow it through, we don't know. Time gonna tell. But the Israelite Brotherhood is not using them folks' history to explain our history as you Israelites do. You know, the Synagogue of Shatan. Man, and then they rotate their heads, man, like they done said something, and like they put all the whole Jewish community under that title. You can't do that. That's just the Edomites in the New Testament talking about the Ashkenazi and his temples. That's like I was corresponding with one Israelite. You know, they quote a New Testament scripture, and I try to show the peoples that, you know, that comes from Europe, from Macedonia, Thessalonians, I think, and that how that the Israelites wasn't up in them parts. And then, you know, you could show this, that how Tigranes the Great, I think in 55 BCE, snatched some of them folks up and took them to Armenia, and then they would go to all parts Europe, man, and settle. And then, you know, how Paul went, man, to them folks and was talking to them. And then that's why that Jesus fella say that I'm only sent for the lost tribes of Israel, and that he was talking about them, the one that Tigranes the Great took to Europe, Armenia, because I show in research that it wasn't no lost tribes. It wasn't no 10 lost tribes, and how that's a myth. All you got to do is read 2nd Chronicles 30, King Hezekiah's history, and then read his great-grandson, King Josiah, in 640 BC to 601 when Egyptians killed him, but how he cleaned the whole promised land up of the Egyptian religion. That's what brought the Egyptians out. You know, and they killed him and put us back on Egyptian religion, and then we would go into Africa to eventually be enslaved and then be in captivity with all this false history that you Israelites try to teach, thinking that you teaching some real history and so forth. The camps is full of it. They done built their whole organizations on false history, showing the mixed history of both of the Jewish groups, and then how they just combine that history and just put it all together and then call it Israelite history. You know, Israelites love confusion. They love confusion and sensational history. If you got sensational history, then, you know, they gravitate towards that. That's like me. Man, it's hard to get by. It's hard to get by. I'm struggling, and I keep struggling because with the truth, man, it's few. It's not the many. It's the few, and it's never the many. And with the lies and the confusion, it's going to be the many. And that's the way it is today with the Israelite community. How they like sensational history. Something that sounds good and tingles the ear. The synagogue of Satan. And then they look at the synagogues and think that that's, you know, me and Ashkenazi took over the Israelite heritage from the Sephardim, and all of them forced to go to synagogues now. But, you know, that's Ashkenazi schools of learning the Israelite heritage, that they could do it privately by themselves. You see what I'm saying? They could learn the Israelite heritage by themselves and not, you know, have to be known of what they doing throughout the world. You know what I'm saying? And you Israelites got to wake up to some real history. You know, go to the Israelite Brotherhood site. You see this image right here. Go there and go through some of the videos, and I'm explaining the history. I'm explaining the history. Now, I ain't the most intellectual person, and I can only give you, you know, the research that I can explain it in, but I think that I explain it enough, meant to where you can understand and that you can make the differences between one group and the other group in our history, you know, compared to their history. All right, Israelites, this is a message from the Israelite Brotherhood. You're going to have to wake up, and you're going to have to stop using their history, calling the Israelite history the Synagogue of Satan. Now, that was Ashkenazi, and then burnt, heard Edomite temple down eventually, and then they had their own schools of learning, and that how the Edomites had heard temple thinking to trick the peoples in the world, thinking that it was the temple that we originally built during Solomon's times, but it wasn't. You know, Hur took that all the way down and built him a brand new temple, you know, for the Edomites. Shalom, Israelites. It's time to wake up, and it's time to just do our history so we can give praise to Almighty Yah. You ain't going to be able to come back to the promised land thinking that you praising Almighty Yah, mixing all them folks' history up and then thinking that it's ours. No, that's giving them a free pass. Shalom.